Everyone. Welcome to the fourth annual season of the ASC Speakers, Cybernetics Salons. As is our tradition, we'll start the season in September with New Macy, and we'll be running monthly throughout next May, usually on the third Sunday of the month. And so, welcome to this year's New Macy participants. Paul, shall I hand it to you?
You may hand it to me. Welcome, everyone. I'm Paul Pangaro, and I'm going to turn it over to Kate Doyle, my co-lead.
Thanks, Paul. I'm Kate Doyle, and thank you so much for having us. Paul and I co-organize New Macy, and we're here with our very beloved New Macy friends and colleagues. And so today we're going to tell you a bit about what we've been doing the past year since we saw you last, what we're currently working on, and how we're currently running our bi-weekly meetings. We've changed a bit of the format and are very excited about it. So that's what we'll tell you about today. New Macy was honored to begin the ASC Series last year, so we're glad to be starting off again. Over the last 2 years, we've been exploring ways of thinking about grappling with challenges, some of which are new and some of which are upsetting, frightening, confronting us right in this moment, and some that seem to repeat endlessly within systems in our world. In different ways, we've asked the question, how can we navigate these challenges so that we not only survive, but that we feel like we are thriving in our living and feeling like we are doing something with what sometimes seems insurmountable. We found that we need to focus on adapting, even becoming, so that we're working with systems and mitigating challenges rather than attempting to prescribe a problem to solution framework. As we discussed last year at this time, we've articulated this way of adapting and mitigating challenges as ontogenetic resilience. Paul, let me hand it over to you to recollect our thinking about that.
So we ended up with this phrase, which I'll define in a moment, but a little background is clearly every organism is used to a certain degree of variability and a certain degree of constancy, right? Evolution brings organisms to that point. And there has to be a range of variability and constancy in order for any organism to survive and even to thrive. So, of course, this applies to human beings, and we have a unique combination of the cognitive rational side where we can interfere with whatever we want, pretty much, and also a more intuitive emotional side, and these are always both in play. And just to be brief about it, I think it's fair to say that our biological history has not prepared us for the environmental, the social, and the technological upheaval that we have created. So given this vast complexity that is unpredictable and indeed really unknowable to an unprecedented degree from prior generations, our genetic evolution didn't prepare for us, and neither has any other form of evolution, right? Any piece of philosophy or the Enlightenment or religion or whatever, it doesn't help. So how do we cope? How do we act effectively and in concert in this context? New Macy was born out of the biological pandemic, which was clearly a shit show, as we say in technical circles, scientific circles, that's a technical term. And that led to the realization that there are many pandemics and many global wicked challenges or wicked problems, as this phrase often goes. And given the fact that now as biology, we're in the middle of this onslaught of extraordinary anxiety that comes with the uncertainties, what do we do? How do we cope? How do we effectively act in concert? So living in such a world, it seems clear that we have to become, and here's the magic term, ontogenetic, not just to be, but to become, and to be always becoming, and to embrace the constant change and somehow find our ways of becoming more comfortable. Maybe that's not the right word, more aware, more functional, and more effective in that context. So in a prior New Macy session, Eric Salvaggio, one of our colleagues, who I don't think is able to come today, wrote a wonderful piece. And by the way, anything we mention here, we'll give you links at the very end. And he wrote a piece that I want to briefly quote. We propose ontogenetic resilience. It's an identity oriented not toward being, but toward becoming, as I've just said. And I continue to quote, ontogenetic resilience moves us away from passive subjects anchored by the stability of institutions, predictability, and so on. Instead, we see new currents, beautiful word, to create new meanings and a sense of identity as, again, as Eric beautifully says, as adaptive stewards of the systems we are embedded in, and indeed, that we have largely created, not entirely, of course. So ontogenetic resilience activates suspense, beautiful word again, the suspension of narrative certainty, and we move into a mechanism of exploration, thoughtfulness, and growth. So these were the ideas behind the studios that we created, which were a series of explorations in conversation and improv and experimentation on various themes. One theme was prototyping conversation. We had many members from that group here. The pandemic of today's AI was my particular interest, which was begun before ChatGPT, but is even more serious now. Sonic mushrooms. I hope that's intriguing to you and causes you to click on links later. Art as steersmanship and sustaining healthy communities. This was largely the group of studios we had. And we offered these at various conferences, including the ISSS, you're familiar with, I'm sure, the International Society for the System Sciences, and also at RSD 11, which was done, as always, the RSD conferences by the Systemic Design Association. Now, all of the above, thank you for your patience, has led us to the current major project, which we're calling Colloquies, which is a little bit of a reference back to Pask using colloquy. Colloquies, colloquium, conversations. Colloquies for Transgenerational Collaboration. And I'll briefly quote some of our attentions. And again, there's much more in the links that we can send. This came out of a couple of conversations that I had with Omar Khan, who's head of the School of Architecture here, and a wonderful character, and has been in the cybernetic community for many years. And we realized that nowhere is there greater passion for confronting the wicked challenges of the world than graduate students and rising faculty. And they're open-minded, they're curious, they're interested in new ways of thinking, and the wicked challenges of the present day are foremost in their minds. And we know the litany. Here's one: climate change, population growth, totalitarian regimes, terrorism, economic insecurity, and systemic inequalities. I don't think our biology was prepared to live in a world with any of those, no less all of them. So the challenges that these students want to take on are many, and they're recursive. And how do we even fathom these complications and these entanglements, as the modern phrase goes? So we see, those of us in academia, these grad students of various kinds, rising faculty, really many people of an earlier generation than I am certainly, are asking, how do I see the world and what do I desire? And ultimately, what do I want to change? So 2 points. Clearly, systems and cybernetics has a lot to offer their interests. I think that's axiomatic with us. I don't think I need to prove that with our group here. But it's my experience, and perhaps your experience, that these communities in systems and cybernetics, including some that I'm involved with, are approached by an enthusiastic scholar, let's call them, PhD student, for example, and that PhD is anxious to learn about what systems and cybernetics can bring. And usually the answer from the systems and cybernetics community is, great, read my 50-page PDF or watch my hour video. Now, this is not good pedagogy, right? So the organizing principle of the colloquies with Omar Khan and myself was, can we design conversations which are rooted in the interests of, let's say, a particular PhD student? What is their vocabulary? What is their worldview? What is their passion? What are they worried about? Start from that, and then bring into that conversation that they have started because of their interests a practitioner who resonates with those particular domains, those ways of working, those concerns. So we've been in the process of matching so-called scholars and so-called practitioners. It's not a perfect terminology, but it's worked okay. And to create a context for conversations across the generations, across geographies, diverse and inclusive, and of course, across the disciplines, transdisciplinary. That's what cybernetics has always been about. So we want to engage with the wicked challenges of our time with these paired conversations. And these are some events that are coming up on October 6, 7, and 8 here in Pittsburgh. We invite you to join virtually or to come. Again, there are links in what we'll send you. So this is essentially what the Colloquies is about. It's not just an event in October either. This is an experiment. We're trying the matching. We're trying all of the things I'm describing to you as the context. And then we want to create an archive, capture what worked and didn't work, and continue, assuming that this is a valid and validated experiment, a valid way of going about it. It's been very exciting. We have a lot of interest. It remains to be seen as we execute that. So again, what I've described to you is where New Macy has come to in these Colloquies interactions. Before that, it was studios, and before that, it was the recognition of the pandemics of so many different kinds. So this is where we're going with Colloquies. Kate, can I give it back to you?
Sorry about that. We also formed a planning group for the Colloquies. We decided, Paul and I were talking about this and decided we wanted to seek a lot of variety in the construction of this project, in addition to Paul's colleagues at CMU. So we formed this Colloquies planning group, and quite a few of you here have been part of that group, and we're so appreciative of that. The planning group unearthed and devised a lot of interesting new ideas and challenges to the original organizing principles of the project. For instance, what does transgenerational mean? Does it mean different biological stages of life? Does it mean a mindset? That was a topic that we've worked with quite a lot. What are scholars and who are scholars and who are practitioners? What are their defining features? We spoke a lot about this. This was a major topic for us, and those kinds of questions, those kinds of inquiries, and the way that we navigated those in dealing with the logistics of our project will, I think, really influence future iterations of this project, of this Colloquies project, and will help us to develop ideas about the nature of the project and the kind of future inquiries we want to pursue. So Paul, can I turn it back to you quickly to mention the connection with RSD, and then we'll get to the next section.
Sure. So RSD, Relating Systems and Design, many of you are familiar, but in case not all of you are, it's been a conference that's gone on for 11 prior years and now the 12th. We, New Macy, were involved in the 11th. And again, there'll be some links in what we did last time. And it's done by the Systemic Design Association. They put it on. And what they've decided to do this year is create a series of geographical hubs. So you can go to Washington or Toronto or Azerbaijan, I think. There are many places to go, 12 in all. And Pittsburgh is one of the hubs here at Carnegie Mellon. So our event that I mentioned on 6, 7, 8 October is part of the RSD 12 activity, and also has sessions of their own that I've described, sessions of our own that I've described, which are these scholar-practitioner pairings. One of the things we want to be aware of is, and forgive me for going back a half a second, I feel like there's such a generational divide, not a desire to be separated, but the worldviews are so different because the experience of growing up has been so different. In the old days, if you said something to someone and you had a particular vocabulary, their knowledge, if they went to a liberal arts college or almost any university, their knowledge would be adjacent to your knowledge. But I think the challenge now is that we don't have adjacent knowledge with other generations. And that's one of the reasons why we're emphasizing this transgenerational idea. It's not the only idea, but it's one of the ones that we want to bring in. Can we design for conversations across the generations and the geographies and disciplines? And this will be the experiment that we'll be doing 6, 7, 8 Carnegie Mellon. Again, we'll give you a link at the end. If you wish to join remotely or come in person, it's free, and we're looking forward to a vibrant set of conversations here. Okay.
So at the same time, we've been working on, or at the same zero time, we've been working on the Colloquies project. We've revisioned our biweekly meetings so that someone, a particular participant in the meeting, brings in a topic, an idea, an inquiry, a provocation, etc., to begin our conversations. This has led to a rich soil for conversation, we think, and the emergence of new ideas and projects. So we'd like to give you a sense of this new format and these kinds of conversations we're having by having each of us who have participated in the new Macy biweekly meetings to take about 2 minutes to describe what topic, idea, or inquiry they brought forth and how they began their conversation. So everyone will, Paul, if you would sort of call out names, we'll just do that for organizational purposes, if you don't mind. And then if anyone, any of us who have not started a conversation yet, as we've discussed, please, if you'd like, offer what conversation you might want to begin. And those of us who have begun conversations, let's just take a minute or so to about 2 minutes to describe what you began and how you began it, and feel free to share slides or video as you like.
Wonderful. Damien, can we ask you to go first, please?
Absolutely. Have I got access to share slides?
I can make you co-host, Damien.
Okay, that'd be wonderful. Thank you very much. Okay, brilliant. That's wonderful. Thank you very much. Okay, warm welcome to everybody. The talk that I gave was about meaning making. I explore a constructionist methodology that informs the development of circularity through the thinking and learning I gained in conversations with the artist David Chapman. And that was actually my dad, which is an interesting start. So I learned further from these to construct a process of meaning making through the actions of drawing, image making, and the design process. And a wonderful concept, obviously, here is from Forster, understanding, how we make sense of the world around us. As a designer, my practice explores a process of prototyping, applying mark making to shape, making sense of my internal dialogue, shared languages, but also that in relationship to the world around me. When I, with my father, would go for walks, we would explore in conversations, both verbal between us, but also marks that shape the language and the experience and the environment that we would walk through. Within these experiences and these marks were the heat, the noise of insects, the smell, broad color, although I'm only showing black and whites at the moment from my father. And in the autumn months and the winter months, we would go inside and we would look at still lives. I found this a fantastic space to learn about and think about the circularity of our conversations. And with that, then I look at my own creative practice and I explore patterns and learning experiences, which I analyze and make sense of, but in a cycle where I look at the idea and its structure, and I look to how I might map that. And when I think of mapping, I think of thresholds, which reminds me of Ranulph Glanville's wonderful terminology around zero spaces, where he looked at and Ashley Hall, Miles Pennington talk in their wonderful article in 2014 about that space when we transform our thinking or we work from a space into another space, and that shifts the way that we respond and deliver and make sense of the world around us. I think interesting here might be to look at Dean Barnland's transactional model of communication that was brought out in the 1970s, where we look at that cycle of conversation and how we might then explore people involved, decoding, encoding, public cues, private cues, non-verbal behavioral cues, and messages that are caught up or delivered, constructed within that conversation, with that development of the relationships. And from that, in my practice, I developed this idea of conversational interaction with the circularity that's implicit and also explicit within the developed meanings, and therefore then dynamic thresholds of conversation as they develop. So that was the cornerstone of the talk that I gave for New Macy. Thank you very much, and I'll pass back to Kate.
Thanks,
Thank
Damien.
you. Wonderful. Diane? You're on mute.
Sorry about that. I haven't presented a topic yet to the group, but I have formulated an idea of where I would come from. I went to Seattle and studied with Rodney Donaldson, whole systems design. And I would structure an introduction to art, his paper, Art as a Manner of Living, and put that alongside of Maturana's paper and Science and Daily Life, to just have a conversation about art as a manner of living and how that is brought up by all of us in the group. So I think that's where I would structure something for the future. Thank you.
Thank you, Diane. Jude, you're next. I think we should run the video and then ask Jude to make a comment. Is that the plan, or is it just the video?
I don't know.
What I'd like to do is just say something briefly and then run 2 minutes of the video, Katie, if that's okay.
Yeah, that's totally
Okay.
fine. And you can just signal for me when to stop, Jude.
Okay. I came to the New Macy's conversations later in the process, and I've been totally enthralled by the opportunity to turn together with a small group of like-minded people. And I really appreciate what Paul and Kate have done this past couple of years. Paul's always invited me. Finally, I picked it up, and I don't regret a second of it. In fact, I'm camping in Rehoboth, and here I am in a Starbucks using their internet capabilities. So what I find most intriguing about these conversations is one leads to another, And of course, you know, many of you know I do videos. So my provocation for the conversation was a short video, and it was provoked by the previous conversation or two. So I'll say that, and then Kate, this is a piece of the 4-minute video that I designed for my presentation.
Thanks,
based on our
Jude.
conversations.
You know what, Jude? Shall I just, I'm thinking it's only 4 minutes. Shall I just play the whole video? Is that okay with you?
It's fine with me.
Let's it. I think that would be nice. Okay.
I think that's great.
Go ahead and play that. Almost there. 1 sec.
And I think we'll be showing it at the RSD meeting, Claudia, if I'm not mistaken. We talked about it.
Okay. Sorry, let me just make sure that excuse me 1 second while yes, optimize. Okay.
Thank you, Kate.
Undesirable present. How can one let present transform itself into a more desirable? There's always the idea of radical change. The radical change takes place in the mind.
It's not a question of what things are. It is a question of how I learn. And as we become confident of that, we stop being these outside observers, we stop being these controllers, and we start swimming in something which flows, not flows.
Just as the fish is the last to know it lives in water, we humans seem to be the last to know that we live in language.
This is not trivial. And this is an explanation, of course, because as we do this, we're changing this dynamics, so that we're changing according to how we're explaining our present. Although I tend to agree with the teacher about formalization, I took care that a whole lot of research effort would not be wasted by making sure that my participants in a conversation could be identified with participants, every one of them, if they had these simple properties: organizational closure, informational openness, evolution, and a mystery. A mystery. That is, I don't know what time it is, nor do you. And I don't believe that any. It's a very simplistic view of the world. Now, that's my first point. Now, how long do I have?
Done there.
Well, 15 minutes. Very good. Could you give me a 5-minute cue? I will. And you. Now, what I do.
Lost sound.
She'd have this beautiful sense of time. That time wasn't synchronized. It had no mechanism. It was like this beautiful kind of continuous understanding of giving people time, stopping for people, talking to people. And she was always interested, and she'd always stop on a bike. Like, you could have this beautiful conversation, and then you'd say, "What time is it?" Like, it didn't matter, And she didn't want macho, misogynist men coming in here with their fucking work boots and knocking shit out of stuff and building crap.
As we as a society, no longer need to work to the clock. Clockwork, clocking in, clocking out. We run out of clockwork. We begin to have time to make art work, make things work, the work of art. So you mean the work of art is timeless? No, to the contrary. The work of art is timeless.
Today is Friday, the 20.
Let me show you something here.
No, that's Saturday. Today is Friday. I should have. Anything the other way?
Right where it is, just leave it.
Hi, this is Mark Barton, City for Promise in Newtown, Connecticut.
Get out of there. The asynchronicity of the video seemed to work.
Sound and video wasn't synced, was it, all the time?
It wasn't, and it was originally, but it wasn't. It was interesting since this is about time.
Very strange, yeah. Any brief comment about that, Jude? What was that about?
I don't know what the provocation conversation was beforehand, but I know it had something to do with time and being in the moment. Oh, the analogy we all were talking about had to do with swimming, drowning, floating, flowing, and that sort of thing.
Wonderful.
So thank you again, Paul.
Great, thank you for that.
And everybody else in that group. Bravo.
Yeah.
Thank you,
Molto
Jude.
bene.
Jude, thanks. It's I think, shall I continue with
my please,
idea
Kate.
brought forth, Paul? So I wanted to resonate and appreciate what you said, Jude, about the way that all of these conversations have been flowing and floating into one another. And I've appreciated that very much as well about this new format we've taken. So the idea that I brought forth to begin a conversation one week last spring started from my missing a prior meeting at which Larry, I think you were, I can't remember exactly what the prior meeting was about, but I was reviewing the transcript of the recording on Zoom from that week the prior meeting that I missed. And I was reading this section about paradox in logic. And our friend and colleague who's here, Larry Richards, was speaking about paradox in logic. And what happened was at the end of his statement, I realized, because I was listening to the sound recording, but I was also reading the transcript, I realized that the transcription software had gotten Larry's statement wrong. So what it wrote was this. Personally, I like to look at cybernetics as the possibility of underwater. Larry didn't say that. I should be clear. This is the transcription software's change adaptation of Larry's statement. But I loved this. And I thought that I would start a kind of provocation for the next meeting, beginning with it. So we ended up having this beautiful conversation, I thought, about cybernetics as underwater and the possibility of cybernetics as a kind of floating, flowing, drowning, submersion, and then ultimately swimming, which led us to, I guess eventually you took this up, Jude, and made that video, your film. And we also talked a lot about a piece that Claudia had written. And feel free to share here, Claudia, if you like. So that's how I came to my provocation to begin the conversation I started, and also sort of where it ended up.
Thank you, Kate. Fred Steyer. Fred, can we ask you to go next? Wonderful.
Yeah, thanks. Thanks so much, Paul. Thank you, Kate. We're a little bit out of the order that we suggested, but that's part of what I wanted to say something about. So I haven't led, although I've been a participant in many of the sessions, I haven't led one yet. What I'm playing with right now that I would like everyone to play with me is going back to Gregory Bateson's idea of cybernetics as an ecology of ideas, which he in turn borrowed from Jeffrey Vickers. And the way that I would like to approach it, given Paul's introduction in terms of how New Macy will be working with scholars and practitioners, is, of course, the ecology of ideas is itself an idea. But to root that in the notion that we are all and need to see ourselves as both scholars and practitioners. So the idea of pairing one with the other is kind of a refutation of something that I want to play with, at the same time open space for that very exploration. And one of the ideas that I would like to be playing with in a larger ecology of ideas, which also builds on the notion of resilience, which was part of the theme that you brought in from Eric Salvaggio, is the very idea of the flexibility and the notions of reflexivity. So the flex, the bending, the ability to bend and hold on to who we are. And to wonder, in our ecology of ideas, how does an idea become sustainable? From the point of view of the practitioner, which is also the ideational person, what does that actually mean for how we adapt to new circumstances? How do we see New Macy as building on the old Macy? How do we see it as holding on to an identity that's changing in response to vastly changing technologies, which is what cybernetics is also seen as being about? How do we understand who, when we identify ourselves as cyberneticians, how do you understand who others are talking to when we say we're a cybernetician? That's also something rooted in the notion of an ecology of ideas of us as being scholars and practitioners at the same time. So ideas of flexibility, ideas of being able to adapt and hold on to variety without getting stuck, are all part of the world I'm inviting you into. And I'm looking forward to many future conversations with all of you. So,
thank you, Fred, and apologies for flipping the order a little bit. Larry, can we have you go next, please?
Yeah, can I share the screen?
You should be able to. Or you need to be made co-host as well.
Yeah, I would.
Mateus, thank you. Right now, right? Yeah.
Okay. Yeah. So at one of the sessions, when we were talking about the subject of time, Mark Sullivan mentioned the term paratactic time. And parataxis had been something that had been mentioned to me a number of times in my life over the last 40 years. And I thought it was time maybe we look at it a little more closely. And so, and that this would probably be something quite relevant to our discussions in cybernetics. So that was the topic. Some of my motivations include my background in constraint theory, where, and we'll get to a definition of parataxis here next, but in contrast to goal-oriented thinking, the focus on dynamics as an alternative to causal thinking. Conversation, of course, is alternatives to communication and control. Then there's the work of Herbert Brun and Annetta Pedretti, which I'll mention here in a second also. So here's the Wikipedia description of parataxis. It's a literary technique, and it's in contrast to syntaxis or hypotaxis. It uses very short, simple sentences, either without conjunctions at all, or if they use conjunctions, they're coordinating, not subordinating conjunctions. Whereas in syntaxis, you have long, complex sentences. Hypotaxis, you have sort of hierarchical structure of things subordinating to things subordinating to things subordinating, also usually in long, complex sentences. So parataxis, it's a technique in poetry as well, in which two images or fragments, often starkly dissimilar, are juxtaposed with a clear connection. And the example that Wikipedia likes to use of this is Ezra Pound. So here are some of the examples. We're all familiar with Charles Dickens. It was the best of times. It was the worst of times. Annetta Pedretti, one of our own, wrote a novel called Memories of the Next Revolution, in which you can enter this novel at any point. You can open the book at any point and begin reading. And this is just an example of some of the language in there. Sit down, said the chair. Clean off the cups, said the table. Arrange the books, said the bookshelves. Get cooking, said the cooker. And washing up, said the sink. So you see the juxtaposition of things that are not subjugated through one of the others. And then there's Herbert Brun's, the books that he wrote, My Words and Where I Want Them, as well as Irresistible Observations and Size and Disguise, are full of these paratactical kind of structures. Here's just one of them: leading innocence, demonstrating ignorance, manifesting indifference, confessing unawareness. It leaves it to the reader or the listener to make the connection. I like to talk about things about like what they're not. So here's some ideas about what the paratactic thinking is not. It's not linear or logical flow of thought. There's no subordination of one thought to another, no beginning and no end, and therefore no external clock time. And that's where the idea of time enters it. There's no merging to a grand scheme, not hierarchical and not goal-oriented. And so some of the things of what it is then, and these are just some of my ideas and what we discussed in our meeting. So thoughts, no matter what they are, the ideas are on equal standing. The connections are made by the reader or listener. Versions of time are determined by the reader and listener. It's dynamic, ever-changing. These things set up side by side, and so there's this dialectical aspect to it, as well as being constraint oriented. So that was sort of the provocation that we talked about. I found it very interesting, continue to find it interesting, and continue to explore it. And maybe we can do more later. Thanks.
Thank you, Larry. So Mark Sullivan, Mark?
Yep. So you might think that Larry and I planned this out, but it's another example of how these discussions actually did flow from one to the other. And a while back, Kate mentioned the term zero time, which, as I recall, was one provocation for a line of discussion. And my initial response to that reverberated off a line from an essay by Herbert Bruin called The Function of Time in Art, in which there's a line that says, "There's never no time." And so I proposed thinking about an alternative to zero time after a discussion of zero time with Larry and a number of other people. We also thought that Pask and other people using the term, including Umberto, were actually talking about what some of us would call clock time or sequential linear versions of time. And so to start my provocation, I proposed that we think about paratactic time, or a kind of non-linear temporal construct, and suggested that in art, it's quite common for the art to create its sense of time. And I said that in general, there are two sort of points of view on that. One is when you're in the time, and the other is when you're creating with time. And of course, you can always impose an external concept of time on that created sense of time, but it's not identical. So this led to a pretty robust discussion of what this could possibly mean. And none of us were particularly certain that we had an infallible notion of what it could mean, but it also seemed to offer some alternatives to a number of dilemmas that come from thinking about the unbudgeability of sequential meaning, and the idea that paratactic time could be a way of structuring temporal relationships without necessarily those sequences dictating the meaning of the events in them, was something that we found of interest not only in art, but also in cybernetics and design and systems thinking. And I think that's more or less the gist of the provocation.
Thank you, Mark. And last in our sequence, Claudia, please. Claudia Westermann.
Hi. So, yeah, from time to change, maybe again. Actually, I think I was actually one of the earlier ones starting with this presentation about cybernetic practice in the design studio. And the key idea was to show some examples of which I thought maybe they work quite well in the design studio, but I had questions about how my colleagues in New Macy, who are not all in design, how they would perceive this kind of exercises that I do with the students, and whether there are options for translation. So under the title Concepts, Objects, and Translations, I presented a variety of techniques for setting constraints within a design educational framework. And the aim of such constraints is actually to encourage and nurture exploration and experimentation, learning for a world in change. And maybe I'm going to show some slides for those who don't know these. I made a 2-minute version. So I have used Lars von Trier's film Five Obstructions as a means as an initiation for architecture students in a master program for in a kind of experimental framework for introducing practice-based research, how to remake something. And in this film by Lars von Trier asked his teacher, Jürgen Leth, to remake his film, The Perfect Human, which has this very particular kind, very reduced aesthetics. He asked him to remake it like 5 times. And I'm just going to show you. So the first obstruction is remake it Cuba, no set, no shot, lasting longer than 12 frames. The questions posed in the original film need to be answered. And then I don't want to show the videos, but go to the worst place in the world, but do not show that place on screen. Play the role of the man. The meal must be included, but the woman is not to be included. Remake the film in any way, or else repeat it again with the second obstruction in Mumbai. And there's another one into a comic. I've used this kind of technique or similar technique for our architecture design students. Translate an architecture work into a film, into an object, into an interactive installation. And these are some of the images. And interestingly, because of this sheer impossibility of like translating architecture, similarly to this kind of case study of the Lars von Trier film, the works came out actually very interesting, and it did do what I wanted, that it fostered exploration and experimentation towards thinking interactive space. So these are just some images. And similarly, I have used narratives and stories and role-playing for the younger students, but the kind of the narratives are different, but the frameworks act in a very similar way. They introduce constraints as a means for exploration and learning as aesthetic experience, or learning through aesthetic experience. And with this, I'm actually stop the share.
Thank you, Claudia. Yeah. Thank you so much. We'll open for discussion in just a minute. Having lived through this, having participated in all of the meetings that were just given a sweep of, I think you have some sense of the sweep. And also, I think you can agree that we have also engaged in this idea of becoming. We had no set agenda other than transdisciplinary, transgeographical, transgenerational. And you can see the extraordinary range that's here. We've had over 100 biweekly meetings in the last few years. Impossible to give a synopsis, to impossible to give a synthesis. It's all uncompressible. But I hope those of you who haven't participated have a sense of where we've been in the very slightest sense. So with that, I'd like, Kate, unless you have, would you like to say anything, or shall we open to discussion?
No, let's move to discussion. Thanks, Paul.
Wonderful. Who would like to speak or put something into the chat? Reactions welcome.
Oh, you know what? I just don't want to forget to say this. I should just, the only thing that I actually meant to say was to thank everyone that participates in the New Macy group. It's such an incredible joy to me to be a part of this group, and I'm so thrilled every time we're together. So I'll just say that. And thanks for sharing your conversation beginnings today.
Thank you for that, Kate, and I concur. It's hard to convey the excitement that comes in these meetings when you don't know where you're going. We have a rough starting point, and again, you can see the sweep over the now 3+ years since we've started. Would anyone who has spoken like to add anything or reflect on what others have said? And
I would.
Please go, Jude.
Thanks. It's another connection that this conversation about our conversations has generated for me, and it had to do with Fred's comment about Bateson's work on cybernetics as an oncology of ideas. Might we have cybernetics as an ontology of ideas? Just a thought.
Yeah, Jude, just very, I said ecology of ideas, although yours is also quite interesting as an idea. Yeah.
Yes, I'm sorry. I meant to say you said Bateson's idea of ecology of ideas. And that triggered for me the idea based on these ontogenetic conversations that you're talking about, as cybernetics as ontogenetic ideas.
Yeah.
That's all.
Oh, for a moment, I thought that was one of those mistranscriptions. but I think it works fine either way.
Thanks.
So one particular moment that stood out for me where one of these flips occurred was when Damien presented some of the patterns similar to those that were behind his presentation, and mentioned told an anecdote about being on a walk with his father, where his father told him to stop paying attention to the visual structure and to pay attention to the rhythm. And this triggered a whole line of discourse where we started to talk about temporal aspects of oral experience, of movement, and so forth. And so for me, that was a really interesting kind of pivot.
The more we can say, those of us who are engaged, the more we can say about that kind of thing, I think the more interesting it should become to those who were not there, because that was the energy that propelled us and that got us unexpectedly from one point, to put it trivially, to another point. And that's where the energy came, I think.
Yeah, I would agree with that. And this amazing idea, the concept that Kate brought to the group as well, of being sometimes submerged in water and what one experiences and sees within water. And that experience of when you come to the surface, if you're in water yourself, and then submerged again, which for me was, and I'm sure for many in the group, was a major pivotal moment in thinking around the kind of sense of experience and how we bring knowledge, or that feedback loop of thinking, experiencing, reconsidering the conversations that we have through that wonderful lens.
Yeah. Oh, sorry, Larry, please go ahead.
I was just going to say, I had a shift in thinking when the subject of rhythm came up. I had always, in my mind, treated rhythm as a pattern in dynamics. And I think the group began talking about the difference between rhythm and pattern. That rhythm doesn't necessarily have to be a pattern, where pattern is something we bring forth. Rhythms, you might say it's always there. There's always rhythm. It becomes a pattern when we do something with it.
Becomes a pattern when we see the pattern.
Yeah, I just wanted to say that, Jude, your earlier comments about your statement of a offering of appreciation about how these meetings sort of one flowed into another really rang a bell in my mind today. And I like these ideas that you're articulating, Damien and Larry, about the rhythm of our conversations and the energy of our conversations, and how we have been swimming through different ideas, and also a togetherness in those ideas, a kind of community.
Yeah, it's good, sort of like in that video where Annetta makes the distinction when we stop letting go of that control, how we begin to flow, not float, but flow, flowing, and how that became a part provoked by your statement from the mistake early on. And this whole process has been really intriguing for me and stimulating me doing some other video work. And I put in the chat for future reference for people that little piece we ended up doing about Herbert Brune, which I would consider a paradoxic idea that I forget her name, Pele, something Pele, made that cartoon of. So it's that little video that I posted. That's a cartoon of the idea of idea. And she did a cartoon of Herbert. And it's Mark, I think Enslин's here. I've been meaning to send it to you, so enjoy. But this was provoked. I went and found it, and I was at Larry's house, and he had a copy of it. So we took pictures and put together this, like, what is that, 1 minute or 2 minutes? I don't know what it is. But anyway, it's in the link. So I love how it's provoking me to do these videos.
I also thought that the segment in the video with Jeff Glassman and Lisa Fay, where pivoting from one scene into another, was a fantastic example of paratactic structures where there's not linear continuity. And it actually got me thinking of something that Mark Enslin, who is here, once suggested. He mentioned that he was thinking about a piece and had created 5 endings for it. And when I first heard that, I was like, what? 5 endings? And so the whole idea of having a piece that has multiple endings is, to me, also a really fascinating idea of a kind of paratactic thinking about structure.
And parataxis can apply to whole books, not just to words next to each other or phrases next to each other. I know, Fred, you mentioned a book that I went out and got where the author actually suggests to the reader, you can try starting here, or you can try starting here, or you can try starting here, and you get different novels out of the same book.
Yeah, that's Hopscotch by Julio
Yes,
Cortázar. Yep. It's wonderful. Yeah, thanks, Larry.
Other comments, questions? We might project into the future and ask the question, ask the critical question, what have we not done? What might we do? Are we anywhere close to a new Macy? Or is it just a clever hashtag, which I take responsibility for, one way or another? Can we go from here? Should we go from here to addressing the Wiki challenges? Now, of course, the colloquies that are coming in October, and there's a link in the chat that will give you a variety of links to what we have been doing and will be doing, including an invitation to the October event if you'd like to join. And that's explicitly about Wiki challenges. But what else might we do, maybe is the better way to phrase the question. What are we missing? What could we bring in? That might be a special invitation to those who have not been involved, and whether or not you would like to be involved. If you see things that you think we're missing, it'd be valuable to have your ideas.
Yeah, maybe.
No, go, Claudia.
Well, we have Pille, who brings in her knowledge in biology. That's very valuable, obviously. It would be great, actually, to have more people in New Macy with a background in different scientific disciplines. I think at the moment we're probably a little bit tending towards the arts and design, like many of us on that area. And it would be actually great to have a wider kind of engagement among the disciplines.
So we could bring them into the meetings and continue in the form that we've done, which is this each session, there's a sort of intentional drift to what's next, or would we plan it more? Any thoughts on that, Claudia?
Yeah, I think this could work in a very, it could work in a similar way. I don't think we would need to change the method.
Yeah,
I think it works. Yeah, it works very well, I think. Yeah.
Yeah, I'd hate to lose this idea that we're just beginning, in my view, of how this organic process is emerging. And I don't know if it can be conserved, but I would love it if we could conserve it. And then do things like the colloquies that are going to happen in Pittsburgh and things like that, but have this as a basic process for a while.
Great. Mark, you have your hand up.
I was just thinking on the question of inviting people from other fields, or broadening a little bit the subject matter. And given the conversation, I was thinking about people that are immersed in some kind of problematic where they are aware that they do not know how to proceed. And so part of their work is really kind of being stuck. And they continue to do things, but there's aspects of local social policy where there's a few things that people will repeatedly enact, putting up billboards or something like that, but they really don't know. And there may be some people who have this awareness where this would be like a mutual benefit in trying to spend some zero time with them.
Lovely. Come spend some zero time with us.
Right.
Thank you, Mark. Fred?
Yeah, I just wanted to build on what Mark was saying. Hi, Mark. That one of the things that would also fit with how we learn together is how we actually invite others in. I agree, inviting others in is good, but what is our invitation like? And what I hear Marcus saying and others is it's not just an invitation to talk to us, but to learn with us about issues that matter to them, that they're also grappling with, bringing other perspectives. And so the invitation itself becomes an enactment of some of the very ideas that we're playing with.
Could be interesting to turn everybody's name into Mark.
Yeah.
I love that.
Yeah.
Okay, Mark.
I agree, Mark. Don't you agree, Mark? What about you? Whoops.
I'd also be curious to know if people have ideas for provocations they would like to see taking off from those that we initiated.
I'd like to see that. I'm aware that I have a new role now in a faculty of engineering and computing, and I think that what's lacking in some ways is the opportunities that we've met through this broad and rich series of conversations. And I think it would be really, well, if I was selfish, I think it would be really wonderful to have within our lecture series in the faculty something as rich as a new Macy group meeting that staff and students could attend. It would bring such different thinking to some of the conversations I'm involved with. And as you said, Claudia, a lot of us have an arts, or many of us do have an arts design background. And when I meet with some of my colleagues in computing and engineering, they're really hungry for new insights and new methods of practice. So it would be extremely rewarding if something like that was possible.
I'm curious if anybody has any ideas of what it has been, not to put these in stone, that has allowed this to emerge as it has. Is there a criteria of some sort that helps? I mean, I think trust right away, but I think that's an interesting question for me. So that if we did want to spread the word, so to speak.
Kate, do you have any feelings about that?
Yeah, it's such a great, thanks, Paul. It's such a great question, Jude. So I'm sitting here thinking about a conversation that you and I had yesterday, Paul, about surviving and thriving. So Paul and I were writing about getting some ideas down about wicked challenges. And Mark, you just mentioned a moment ago how it would be potentially useful or helpful to help others navigate or work with others in navigating these kind of cyclical problems, challenges that are coming up, and that people get stuck. And so I think that's something we're directly working with the Colloquies project. But one thing I had happened to mention to Paul yesterday is that I've been thinking a lot about working with challenges and surviving, but also just thriving in my living. And that's something that this group, biweekly group, has helped me to thrive in my living as a person that attempts to be transdisciplinary. Fred, I was thinking about your mention of the ecology of ideas and about the relationship of the word ecology to this sense of dwelling or home. And so at the same time, I've been floating in my own work and life and being someone that works, between or maybe even beyond discipline, as we've been discussing. The New Macy group has offered a kind of dwelling for me, dwelling that's always in flux because we embrace change.
I think there was another point early on in the discussion when we were talking about ontogenetic resilience.
Mm-hmm.
And Claudia and I much of the discussion had focused on needing to be secure in the midst of change. And we raised the desirability of risk-taking and said that we also wanted to create an environment where people could feel like they could take risks. And I think that was a very important turn.
Thanks, Mark. Yeah, yes, I very much agree. Back to your comment, Jude, about trust. Our ability to be vulnerable, to start a conversation and not know where it goes because we have a sense of our dwelling in this community, in this kind of community that's our floatingness.
Wonderful. Larry, we'd love to hear from you. How are you, Larry?
Can you hear me?
Yes.
Yeah. I'm glad to be here. I did have a tinge of gosh, I really missed some wonderful conversations. But but I've been involved in another set of conversations going along with the colleagues, my Felderquist colleagues. But I as an outsider, I have a few things to say. The first one is so it was difficult to keep up with the conversation because in each of the visitations you offered us in your conversations, they had profound resonances for me about some wicked problems that I've been dealing with, and each one of them was an inspiration. So I felt like I could barely digest that before the next one came along and deranged my physical and mental orientation of the moment. So that was a delight. And I'm going to need to chew on that for a little while. But so many of the things I've been wrestling with, I had those pivots during the things that you offered. So I may have missed a lot, but I got way more just from being here than I could possibly express. And I had to make myself come this morning because my best friends are getting remarried. They got married in a civil service where only 4 of us could be there, and now we're doing it for the community. And so I have to go soon, but I'm so glad that the meeting started up again and that you started with this. I'm incredibly inspired.
Thank you, Larry. It's wonderful to see
Thank you.
Have a wonderful ceremony today.
Yeah. And there's one other thing I want to say, which someone did say, which was about Jeff and Lisa and the pivots, because I just thought we live in language, but part of that language is how we live in our bodies, and it was nice to have a moment where that was expressed with words, but also with the way those shifts happen and how that was demonstrated and embodied. And I would love to come someday and do some of that with you all.
Wonderful. We look forward to that.
Yeah, and I'm very interested in this transgenerational thing, because it's such a wicked problem in the community that I'm in, and it's not a problem, it's a catastrophe at the moment. No, it really is in so many ways. And so and the people solving it actually, they asked me to be a part of the group, and I had to say to them that I refused, because I didn't think that the people who created the problem could solve it.
It sounds like an Einstein quote.
Probably. But I thought the way that you all are going about it challenged that in a way that I found very inspirational. So I think you're doing what you're talking about, which is really nice to see. Yeah. So
thank you so much. Thanks for that.
And I do have to duck out, so excuse me for speaking and running, but it's great to see you all.
Great to see you, Larry. Be well.
Yeah, take care. Bye-bye. See you next time, next month.
Yep. Paul, I'd like to add something to Larry. I should have interrupted him before he left, but since he mentioned chewing on something, I think one of the things that really stood out for me in terms of being part of this group, that I would also like others who weren't part of the initiation of those ideas, is building on Larry's chewing on. Just think of what we were offering as a meal, but to see the connections between the things which you might have with a good meal. So, for example, asking questions of yourselves, which were clear to us who were participating in this. So, for example, how do Claudia's obstructions from Lars von Trier, how does that connect with Larry's parataxis? And questions like that is seeing these as not isolated statements of where we're going, but they're all fitting together in a very nice way, like a good meal might. And maybe this is our dessert right now. Who knows?
So actually, you did it now, Fred. I wish Eric was here, because I think that being able to talk about the mushrooms and mushrooms making sound with synthesizers would also be a really welcome sort of addition to the variety of the presentations. So hopefully you'll get a chance to talk about that at some point.
Oh, you know what? That reminds me, Mark. We should also mention that Eve Pinsker led one of our meetings doing. She called them gibberish exercises. Is what she called them, Paul. Yeah. And it was. I thought it was just I had a fabulous time, and I thought that the meeting that week was wonderful.
Yeah, I think it's actually interesting how things come together and like return again. Also, at the beginning, Jude said ontology, and then but it should have been ecology. And then I was thinking, it's so interesting because, and then Kate says dwelling, and then because recently I was reading Roger T. Ames, who is a philosopher with a focus on comparative philosophy between Chinese and Western philosophy. And he brings in this idea of zoetology, life. So instead of ontology, which is always emphasizing entities and essences, he brings in zoetology. And that actually links then to the paratactical, and Ezra Pound, who translated Chinese philosophy and developed this kind of particular way of image poetry in the English language. And I think, again, there are links between the dwelling and the living, and how we want to get out of these static essences in a way that tend also to be somehow exterior to the world in Western thinking. But it's not to bash on Western thinking, but to find kind of alternative ways of looking at how looking at the world, I think.
We have a few more minutes. We might.
I wanted to just say that it was interesting how the rhythms generated patterns in this conversation between. I'm sorry?
In this conversation as well
in
as.
This, yes, that's what I mean.
Yeah, as well as Damien's work. Wonderful.
Also, to follow up on Claudia's comment, there's some really fascinating examples in Brazilian popular song of what some people call image lyrics, which are paratactic, image-oriented language phrases used as lyrics in conjunction with rhythms.
Huh. Anyone who hasn't spoken who'd like to make a comment? Ask a question? Offer criticism? Pile.
I've been thinking about parataxis and its relationship to metaphor or isophor. There seems to be an intentionality with the metaphor, whereas paratactics, as I've heard it today, and it's my first introduction to the term, seems to be open-ended, that it is entirely up to the listener or viewer or to create whatever the conjunctions are. And then somehow, I'm not sure how it's related, but in terms of when Claudia was talking about Chinese poetry, with the lady that she put me in touch with in terms of the multi-generational praxis for RSD 12, I got talking to her about how we develop our cultures differently according to how we praise our children. In English, we very often emphasize, good job, well done, with an emphasis on the result of whatever the child is doing. Whereas in my original culture, the Estonian culture, as I learned it, we emphasize the manner of the doing, dupli, traki, and these are emotional and attitudinal and orientational things rather than the result. And then I asked her, what do you do in your Chinese culture? And apparently the emphasis is on connectivity, relationship, in terms of how the children are praised. And I got thinking about how this leads to rather different cultures as they arise.
Beautiful. I love that idea. I've always hated good job when it arose in this culture, not when I was a kid, thank God. But afterwards, anyway, thank you, Peter.
I still hate it, especially when it comes in a little thumbs up.
This means the wrong thing in some cultures, so we can't use that. All right, before we devolve entirely, maybe it's time to thank everyone, including Mateos, for managing us so well and sending out announcements and so on, and turning it over to Howard for whatever he wishes to finish with. And again, the link is in the chat. links are in the chat. Howard.
Thanks, everyone. It's been delightful to be with you as I've prepared and eaten my breakfast off camera. And for next month, we have Rafael Arar, who is an ASC member that we've not heard from too much in our conversations, but he's doing very fascinating work, and look forward to talking with him and hearing his presentation and then subsequent conversation. So look forward. That will be next month, because we don't want to conflict or intersect with RSD. We'll be doing the 4th Sunday of the month on October 22nd.
With thanks to everyone.
Thank you
Anything
so much.
else? I think
Thank you.
Many thanks to everyone. Have a good Sunday.
Bye.
Thank you.